Zoom. Welcome to the African Burial Ground Preservation Committee for June 1st, Monday, however you want to put that. We will do the roll call, please.
Okay, so we have someone from the Black Heritage Trail.
Yeah.
Okay, and also we have Jerry Ann by Zoom. Okay, and we have Black Lives Matter as our Jason.
Yep.
Okay, great.
Jason's here, yes.
Great, thank you. And then we have Dee from the Cemetery Committee. Yep, and Ron, our representative. And then we have Kathy, who is not a member, but is our stalwart
Yes. Retired
archaeologist. And then we have staff. We have Corin Hollowell, Public Works, Jennifer Smith, Legal, Suzanne Woodland, Intrepid,
everything.
durable things that need to get done.
And I'm Counselor Joe Kelly. Perfect. Our next call to action is to review the draft and approve the draft minutes from the November 17th, 2025 meeting, which is kind of crazy to think that that was our last official meeting. Do we have any questions or any amendments to the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I would call the question. All in favor?
Okay. Do we have a
Aye.
formal motion?
Oh, yeah.
So,
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
Second.
second, okay, thank you. Now we're all in favor.
Now we're on, including
Okay.
Jason on Zoom.
Okay, got it.
Okay, and then just quickly want to acknowledge, we put in a request for the city council to change the name that and update the mission statement. And they did ratify the amended name change, and our mission statement. So just wanted to give the group an update on that. And then next would just be a quick report on the discussion with the Black Heritage Trail regarding the long-term care of the remains. That's kind of been the focus of this committee, figuring out who, where, and that obligation. So I would pass that to Jerry Ann. The update.
Paused.
Oops, sorry.
I stopped.
Mute.
Oh, do you want to unmute her on this side?
She should be able to unmute herself, but I'll send her a note. Yep, there she goes.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry. One question, I was trying to get the thing to unmute.
No, you're okay. Just we're just looking for a little bit of a report on the discussion with the Black Heritage Trail regarding the long-term care of the remains and how that looks on your side.
So we're ready to take care of them. We have a space. I think I did bring up the challenges that we had. Two challenges is
Dedicated
refrigeration.
Yep.
And a generator in case the power went out. Those were my only concern, but we do have a space. We're able to care for them long term. Honor room in the space that we have, and so on and so forth. And we'd make a ceremony around the whole thing, of course.
Yeah, because I think it was not a full committee meeting where
Yeah.
this was discussed. So I think just for purposes of a little additional background, which is in December, I think it was, we had a meeting with the Black Heritage Trail, the Portsmouth Library representatives, City of Portsmouth, Kathleen, and we explored whether it would make sense to have the Black Heritage Trail, whether they could hold the remains that we have sacredly, under, an understanding of working with this committee and with the descendant community in terms of caring for them, and then hearing and working with the parties about what, if any, additional testing now or ever is done. So that was a conversation back in December, and we've been trying to get the whole committee, enough of the committee together since then, so that we could kind of share that, and for those that were not part of that conversation, to see kind of your input as we continue to hopefully explore that as an option or hear of any concerns that we haven't already begun to identify. We talked about, and Kathy, can do a lovely summary of the types of remains that we have and the space needs, and we kind of covered that with the Black Heritage Trail folks. And as you heard from Jerry Ann, they are comfortable that they have the space and can create a sacred space around that and ritual around that as we bring them into that space. And then we, work on some documentation to reflect that, report back to the state of New Hampshire that this is where they will be held and cared for. So that's kind of where we are. And the question is, do we want to get other input? Are we comfortable with,
Starting to move
where
forward.
we are? Yeah, to start to move forward. So I'll stop there, but that's to bring you all along to why we're having this conversation, is that there was one in December amongst really just the Black Heritage folks and the library, which was, I think, one of your suggestions as a fallback. And the library would remain a fallback if there were some issue of concern that we could have a good relationship of care. So, anything else?
No, I think that's a good summary of it.
Okay.
So just open up for discussion if people feel that we are ready to move forward as staff to start to draw up contracts.
Documentation
Yes,
of
figure out a budget of how much the unit would cost, the generator, who would pay for that, be responsible for that, X, Y, and Z. So I would open up the floor for anyone to share their opinions.
Kathy would like to be recognized.
Perfect, Kathy.
I do want to add an update to the conversation, because one of the things that I think Jerry Ann expressed pretty eloquently was the need to just continue the understanding these are sacred ancestral remains. And I've been in a conversation with Peter Lamb about crafting a container for the teeth. I will meet with him tomorrow because it's an interesting kind of cross-section between sacred nature of the remains and the little bit of science that may still prevail in case these teeth will ever be ready for some kind of additional DNA testing. So it's not the same as just a simple container that will be interred or set aside. It will need to be open, in other words. So I'm going to talk to Peter a little bit at length about dimensions and ideas, wood type. I still have some shavings left over from rock rest when we put the remains in coffins, and Peter thought there would be a lot of symmetry around treatment of the remains and the remnants of the remains, and that we can use those same shavings to kind of help to house and buttress and keep them from bumping into one another. And they're already in little plastic bags with identifying tags, so I know which tooth goes with which individual, which, is, from the scientific end of things, is a kind of important thing to keep track of. So I'm going to brainstorm with Peter. We'll get back with Jerry Ann and the Black Heritage Trail about some of the ideas we come up with and see what lands for them as the best way to go forward.
Wonderful, thank you. I love that. The connection with the two. Okay.
Anyone else? Jason?
Jason, do you have any opinion? Do you feel like you're comfortable if we go forward in this direction?
No, you answered initially when can you actually hear me okay?
Yes. I don't know why.
When you actually started the conversation and you said, as the Jerry Ann was sharing that her concerns, you answered it sounds like you're already trying to come up with resolutions for a generator, for whatever concerns Jerry Ann raised. We're already looking into resolutions for those. So I don't have any concerns or thoughts.
Okay, thank you. Ron, do you feel like this is?
That's a great option. I remember we talked about it before. I'm ready to move forward in that direction. Only question I would probably have is for Black Heritage Trail, Jerry Ann. Is there anything else besides refrigeration generator that they would probably want and or need. Jerry, is there anything else you guys think you would want and or need in regards to that?
I don't think so. I can't think of anything else. Kathy, do we need anything else?
Yeah, this goes back to the conversation we did have in December where the generator would be in the unlikely event of a power outage because there are some pulverized samples that were sent down to the Roots Laboratory in the University of Mass Lowell. And those are in a refrigeration, in a freezer at the IAC office in Dover. So those are the materials and remains that would need some additional refrigeration for long-term storage. The remains, the teeth themselves are pretty intact and don't need a lot of extra care besides the fact that they'll be in a sacred container and place that will not be around for public viewing or there'll be a kind of security around their presence, I think.
Beautiful.
Perfect, and I think we can add language or provisions in whatever documents the city provides, and we all can, well, between the two entities agree upon.
I think one of the conversations we had before is just in terms of a generator, we just have to remember that's a little trickier because you're in the HDC, and there needs to be space for such, and I don't know what the loads, so that could be tricky, but we talked about the Portsmouth Library potentially being a fallback because generally where the office is in the downtown, which tends to get its electricity back quickly, barring, something really significant. So I think it's something we explore, but I wouldn't want that to be a deal stopper.
Mhm.
So I think there are ways to make it happen regardless of, maybe some of the challenges based on location, building structure, where you could put something that would be, safe and effective. So,
And legal to use.
yes, so
Okay. Well, I guess we will then look for a report.
we'll keep then proceeding then on this path and see if we can wrap it all up and maybe what we should. Do we want to brief any other members of the community, the descendant community, in terms of any communication? Do you want to wait until we get further along?
I think we would wait till we get further along
Okay.
and then release some type of joint statement between the Black Heritage Trail and
City.
in the city.
Okay.
Okay, everyone feels good with that? I know I do, I'm very
Okay,
happy.
so we'll proceed then with kind of putting this in writing so we can begin to flesh this out and we can talk about money. I think we have a
Okay.
little bit of money left in the African Burying Ground Trust, and I think Kathy, once you have some idea of cost for the sacred container, let us know and we'll kind of tee that up as well and see how we could make that work, because the city council could
Yes.
approve
Some funds for.
some funds for that coming out of that trust. So.
Okay, and the next item on our agenda is the update regarding the Sargent Museum and outreach from the New Hampshire Department of Natural and Cultural Resources. So I'll hand it over to staff.
Actually, I'm gonna hand it over to Jerry Ann.
Hand it over to Jerry.
Because I think you've been talking with the state archaeologist and have the update.
My apologies, Jerry, and I should have.
Oh, no, that's okay. I was trying to look up the guy's name on the latest thing that I got. So,
Mark Doborowski.
That's
Yeah,
his last name again?
it's like Doborowski.
Yeah, it's I had to get it spelled for me, so I'll do it. It's Doperalski. Doborowski. There's an L in
There
there.
we go.
So I know the last, so we met with the state archaeologists and the we is the Seacoast African American Cultural Center, the Black Lives Matter New Hampshire, and Black Heritage Trail, to discuss what we want, the best course of action to take in handling the remains from the Sargent Museum. The final decision was that this descendant community represented by the three organizations would would take the remains and rebury them in Portsmouth if available. The thinking was that we would want her to be in a cemetery where there were other people of African descent. And so Mark was going to check with Portsmouth to see if there was a space in one of the older cemeteries and to put her remains in. Her remains is just a skull, so it's a small, it's not a full skeletal remains. I don't know what we will need. I don't know. The last email I got said that they were passing it all, since we agreed to take it and the Black Heritage Trail agreed to take it. They were going to sign it off and arrange a drop-off point date for us to take it, and they'd be done. I don't know what it means on their part, if that means they're all done, but the three organizations are ready to do what we have to do. We would like to rebury the remains, put a headstone, and have a official just ceremony reinterring the remains. And we did not come up with a date or time yet, because I just got this that they want to just hand it out. So I don't know what it all is. I think we have to, Daria, I think we had to set a meeting with the town cemetery, the committee. And then from there, I still have to respond to Mark on how and when the drop-off will be. Or should I say the exchange, or the closing of their responsibilities.
I can add a little bit, which is I did, because I've been in communication with the state archaeologist and the director of public works, and he indicated that he would volunteer our staff to assist with any reburial. The real tricky part is really that because we have historic cemeteries and we don't have much space, because we don't normally do any reburials there, the question is, do we have a space that we could be sure not to disturb any other prior burial? Is there a space that would be meet the conditions of, wanting to be, with other members of the community, but like I said, without disturbing? And I know there was some ground penetrating radar work that was done in the North Cemetery or Union. So
in specific areas.
Yeah, I mean, sounds like we don't need much area, so the question might be, and this is maybe it doesn't have to be a committee conversation, but a conversation with those in the cemetery committee who have the right information to figure out, is there an appropriate space that would work for all persons?
Yeah, so that, the other thing, Kathy and I were talking, we went to the one that they were doing over at the Langdon Cemetery.
Yep.
And we wondered if that would be a good place as well. I'm not sure. I don't even know who we talked to about that. And they are starting construction over there. They're worried about disturbing remains as well.
Corin, do you have any thoughts?
As far as our cemeteries,
Yeah.
I would definitely need to talk to Steve Buzzell. I do think we could probably find space. We could go back to where they did the ground penetrating radar. We have those in emails, those locations. I think we'd have to look into what are the specifications for, how these get appropriately put in the ground, how deep, that sort of thing. I know they ran into a lot of rock in that area, but I do think it's very possible to do it in that area.
Because it's small.
It's small. I just don't know what the requirements are, so I'd want to know what those are.
Okay.
But I think there's a good chance we could find a space.
Yeah, like
Even if we had to
maybe-
get UNH back with a ground
Right.
penetrating radar again to help us, we might need to go through that process. But
yeah, and I don't know how much ground penetration radar was done around where we did the reinterment of the wall.
Oh, you're talking about, on the
there
wall
was
near
none
the
done
tree.
there.
There was-
Right.
Yeah.
That would have been a long time ago, right, Kathy? They didn't do ground penetrating
No,
radar then.
My understanding is they were looking for certain, I don't know that they came anywhere near along that wall.
I don't think so. They were on that big empty, well, what looked empty.
Where they hit
Where
ledge.
we thought maybe
So
that
that's
was
not-
a poppers type area. I think it's
And
very
what-
possible to do it there, to do it in that cemetery somewhere.
Well, I think one of the things that Jerry and I talked about, with the reason that the Senate community wants to bring them to Portsmouth is because there is a visible, black history here, and there are certain burial grounds that actually have, blacks buried there. So we wouldn't wanna just kind of willy-nilly choose a burial ground because we got a spot, and stick it in. I don't think that's kind of where we're, I don't know, it just doesn't feel completely appropriate. And the reason Jerry Ann and I talked about the Christ Church burial ground is there's already been 2 ground penetrating radar surveys. And there's pretty good substantiation of results of where the location of those 14 burial sites are.
Where's this, Kathy?
The Langdon,
The Langdon Farm.
where Haven and
Oh.
PHA, there's
Okay, yep,
a
yep.
very well noted marked survey.
Okay.
And they're reportedly exclusively black burials there. So it almost seemed like there's a calling there. And again, this is a skull. It's a small, obviously fragment of the human body. But Corin, you raised some really good points about, in terms of what, for health reasons, and are there laws about burying human remains even if they're a couple of hundred years old? So we might, need to understand, do we need to go 4 feet down, for instance, or is there some further requirement that makes this a legal burial?
And I know there are, I don't have the criteria off the top of my head, but this actually came up in a completely different context, and I know the health department actually has a handy, they've looked at this before for other purposes, so, we can track that down for another meeting.
Thank you.
I guess my other question would be, if it's being handed off, for lack of a better term, how's that being handled? I mean, is that something that needs to be climate?
Yeah, so that's what I
Control, or-
think Jerry Ann is waiting to hear back from the state archaeologist of what requirements they have, if any. We don't know what it's being stored in right now. It's just being stored.
Got it.
So I think once the Black Heritage Trail gets a little bit more information, we can just ask them to, and because then that will have to decide, is this a vessel that it can be buried in, or do we have to create a vessel and figure that out? Or assist the Black Heritage Trail, however it work.
And I think if you wanna explore the Langdon site, then I think it's a conversation with, it's not a city site, with the
Yeah.
property owners and see their willingness to.
I think we should definitely, I would agree with you that I think that it's definitely a
Something to explore.
Yeah, we should reach out to them.
Okay.
I know that the property owners and the respective groups have been really good. We're working with the state and staff about preservation and respect to the grounds there.
All right, do you want the city to facilitate that, or Jerry, how would you like to make that happen? Do you want us to set up a meeting, or, like a virtual meeting to talk about it?
I would love for the city to set up a virtual meeting.
Okay, all right, we will work on that to get the right people in the meeting to have a conversation as to the viability of that.
Do you also want to see the letter from Mark about the transfer of the remains? Because I can forward that to you as well, so you have that on file.
Sure.
I would say any information you're comfortable with sharing as
Okay,
regards
for
to
sure,
this,
for sure.
that'd be great.
Because I guess they're just waiting for me to sign the letter and get done with that.
Yes. Would it be nice for you if we could help move along and solidify a tentative plan?
Yeah.
So it's not all on your
That
staff.
would be great, yes.
Okay, well, that actually brings us to the end of our formal agenda. Our next, yes.
I'm gonna make a suggestion, well, you could do schedule next meeting, and then under other business, I think it would be good to just share with others who weren't able to attend the pre-construction meeting, and I know Jen was there, and maybe she could do a
Perfect.
summary of, how that went, because this is part of the mission of the broader committee, which is to keep an eye on these important
Sites,
sites.
so why don't we schedule our next meeting and then we'll hear from Jen. I guess part of it is, do we think we wanna meet in July or August? Do we think we'll have much to? I know a lot of people.
Would be slightly inclined to give us
A little bit
2
more.
months to
2
do
months,
more
yes.
drafting and to
That's
get
what I was.
meetings together.
That's what I was thinking. So are we thinking?
So it's Monday, September, right?
Are you thinking September? Are you thinking?
It's up to you guys. I should be able.
I mean, if we-
Between Jen and I, we'll find a way to make sure there's a meeting that one of us will be here.
Is there since there's nothing uber urgent and really pressing, I know that a lot of committees tend to break a little in the summer, and we are only really meeting a few times a year anyways. Does it feel like scheduling in September feels okay to everyone? And if there's something that comes up, if we get urgent information that needs committee feedback, we can always get everyone together.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. So given, yes?
I just wanted to clarify, does that mean no action takes place, like there's no transfer of the teeth for me to the Black Heritage Trail? I mean,
So
does that
that,
involve?
that's been, that will be worked through.
It's up to you. If you're comfortable as a committee delegating us to kind
Staff
of work
to-
on the documents and making that happen, then we can do that. It just depends the oversight, you know, do you wanna see the documents before we make that transfer happen? You know, it's gonna be respectful to
Okay.
how much you wanna do.
Do we need to meet again before that happens? Because if you get the documents and then you come up with an action plan,
Yeah,
I think
I
that's
mean,
fine.
I think that's fine. So I think
Okay.
in the meantime, whether it's a memorandum of understanding or something, we can draw something up that approves the transfer of the remains from Kathleen to the Black Heritage Trail under the understanding that you know what I mean, documents of agreement are coming.
Okay.
Does that, so just to make it formal, we can, I guess we
Yes,
look
we
for
should
it to
take
be a
a vote.
motion?
Yeah.
So it would be a motion for the city to draft a memorandum of
To
understanding.
authorize, if you authorize the transfer of the remains to the Black Heritage Trail, that would be sufficient.
We're authorizing the transfer, but the transfer won't really happen because we don't know if Black Heritage Trail is gonna have the
Well-
refrigeration.
Right.
we'll have to, when the conditions are, you know.
Yeah,
are
so if,
appropriate.
When the
yeah, so if
conditions
something
are met.
happens
Yep.
before our next meeting, then, and the conditions are met, then
Yep.
they can initiate the transfer.
And keep in mind, you've got two very distinct sets, so it might be easier, because we don't have refrigeration for one set, depending on, you know, Kathy, you know, maybe going off to, you know, dig in the dirt somewhere for the summer, and maybe she would like to get that transfer to Jerry Ann and Black Heritage Trail before she takes off.
Then we can figure out the I.
And then we can
piece,
figure out
IE
the
piece.
other pieces, and we can figure out the scheduling for the, you know, for a more formal event.
Yes,
Is that what you had in mind, Kathy, that there might be an opportunity to kind of do this in pieces?
Yes,
yes,
yes.
cause yours are, cause
Yeah.
the ones that Kathy have are not in a climate controlled
Right.
refrigerated unit.
All right, I will make the motion to have Kathy Wheeler transfer the non-climate controlled portions of the remains to the Black Heritage Trail for custodial opportunities.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Be held in sacred trust.
Yes.
Okay, so we have a second, Daria. Okay, all in favor? Aye. We're all here now, so.
Yeah, great.
Great, awesome. Okay, and so,
And I would just add, if it turns out, Kathy, that you have like a estimate for work for a container, why don't you send it to Jen and to me, and if we need to bring it to the assistant mayor to put, you know, that on a city council agenda,
then we can,
you know, to get release of funds, we could do that.
without having to reconvene the committee.
Okay, All right.
So it looks like the date would be September 14th because the first Monday
Right.
is Labor Day.
That is not a city, did you check, is that
The
a city
14th
council
is a
meeting?
city council. It's, the 7th is not.
So you're thinking this, do you wanna do it on the same day as the city council?
Yeah, I should be fine.
Okay, so the 14th, September 14th. 4 o'clock work for everyone still?
Yes.
Okay, and then I would open the floor to Jen Smith, Jennifer Smith, for an update on the site plan meeting and all the stuff at the Langdon.
Yeah, thank you, Assistant Mayor. Although Kathy was also there and Jerianne was also there and you were there too.
yeah.
Okay, so
And
we
you
really
were there,
got,
and you were there.
we had quite a group, so I don't need to take the floor. Just to say, I think the meeting was very well attended. I haven't been to many construction sites. The ones I have been to were in urban environments that were much less welcoming than this one, I'll say that. Usually I'm just scurrying past, trying not to have something fall on me. This was, I thought everyone spoke. Craig Welch introduced introduced everyone, set the table by speaking to what the farm had been in the past, and that enslaved people had toiled there and thus been buried there, and that there were 14 known graves. And then he ceded the floor to Jessica, last name Kofalis. Am I saying that correct, Kathy? Kofalis. And she's the executive director of IAC, the Independent Archaeological Consulting Group that's kind of overseeing how, I did memorialize this, so this can be, you guys can read about it for the next time, or I can send it out later. She spoke about something called NEAs, the no entry areas that are demarcated very clearly with snow fencing and also white paint on the ground. And the reason that they do that, although there is a little stone wall, is they've done the ground penetrating radar to make sure that disturbances in the soil that can be known are known, and then marked above ground so that nothing gets laid down on top. So no one's running over that area with a bulldozer, even though it's outside of the stone wall and there may not be graves there. You don't want to disturb anything, even if it's just in close proximity. So extra care around where the lines are clearly demarcated. Lots of care and thought goes into, if you see something, say something, and what that might look like. You might see some little sparkle in the ground. That could be a button, it could be a shroud pin, it could be a coffin nail. Proceed with caution at all steps. Kathy, you or Jerianne or Dee could speak to the oral history that Jessica referenced, that it's very likely that there is other graves there. And do you want to speak to that?
No, I think that was my main concern coming out of there, is that somewhere on that lot, there's another burial ground, or it's believed to be another burial ground, and we don't know where it is.
Yeah.
It's how much caution can we expect from, a construction
A
company?
backhoe.
Being blunt, but it's I guess that's my main concern.
Yeah, and a valid one, and I don't know, Jerianne or Kathy, if you got the overall impression that folks understood the seriousness. Kathy, you're nodding.
I met the man who was the likely operator, and we did talk on site about the challenge of, there's a person who's 12 feet removed when he's up in his cab from the end of where his teeth hit the ground, and you really gotta be careful and really cognizant of the slightest detail. But the man that I spoke to was actually, he's had experience going to, he was the guy that was at the hotel that burned down on Route 1 in Kittery, and he used his bucket and his excavator to recover the remains of the individual who died in that fire. So he's cognizant and sensitive to the really exigencies around looking for the smallest detail. So to just add to Jennifer's report, there's a state law that requires 25 feet buffer on all sides of a fenced burial ground, because it's clear through historical records and real data that not everybody gets buried inside a fence, and we don't know, in fact, how old that fence is around those graves. And in fact, when we did the GPR, there were graves outside of the fence boundaries. So first of all, there's a 25-foot boundary, and that was the snow fencing. And then there's a 25-foot additional buffer from the actual anomaly that the GPR picked up. So there's, in some instances, almost 50 feet away from the wall, there's this additional kind of buffer. As a result of this buffer, the engineers actually redesigned the location of the building. But boy, when you look at it on the ground, there's white paint on the ground where the corner of the building is, and then you are right up against the 50-foot buffer, because they didn't want to give up any space. They felt like, they really needed to have the full dimensions, but they honored at least the extra 50 feet from the edge of the stone wall. They did not do survey on all ground penetrating radar on all sides of the burial ground, the fenced boundaries, because there were trees there. And the easy part is when you have nice grass, but ground penetrating radar equipment does not do bumps, it doesn't do trees, it doesn't do obstacles. So there's still a lot of open questions, and we're hoping at least the first 25 state mandated feet of avoidance is going to help us out. And as soon as we get anywhere near on that boundary, we're going to just be sure we're paying extra attention. And I don't know how to answer your question about the one we don't know about. I mean, we've got a good plan for no entry area around this one, but, someone's really going to be happy to pay attention and call it out when they see it. If it's the guy that I spoke to, I have some confidence in it. They have a lot of different people running heavy equipment. That's a less of a certainty.
Yeah, Kathy, you may be able to speak to this, and you all on the committee may know this already, but it was news to me that the ground penetrating radar just shows disturbances with like squiggle lines. It doesn't show, it's not like, oh, there's a picture of, it could be a tree root or a rock or, some other, just something naturally occurring in the soil. So, but the graves that they know where they are, you can actually see them. And because, we're the city and we're subject to RSA 91A and right to know, I did not receive and they don't make public the documents that actually show where the graves are, but they do know where those 14 are. But they keep them confidential so that people can't go and dig them up.
Right.
What ground penetrating radar does is provide an indication of what we call anomalies. It's where soil looks disturbed. And soil can be disturbed by any number of influences, and it could be a tree root, it could be a gravel vein, it could be a grave shaft. And what gives us a little bit of confidence is that grave shafts have a pretty typical orientation and length and width and depth. And when you meet all of those sort of three-dimensional criteria, that's when we start to say, we're pretty confident there are at least 14 burial shafts out here. And I think Jesse kind of reminded people that sometimes the GPR will not show you every single burial shaft for one reason or another. And we've demonstrated this at burial grounds where we surveyed the whole area, and then we went back and stripped the earth and then found additional burial shafts that we just didn't know were there given the GPR. What also gives us some further confirmation of the 14, what we'll call relatively known burials, is that there are some headstones and some kind of demarcations that are more than just the GPR signatures.
I guess one other thing that we haven't touched on is there was a landscape architect there who talked about tree removal. And right now there are no plans to remove any trees, in the, what Kathy called the buffer zone or around, immediately adjacent to the stone wall and the graveyard. And the conversation was had about if there were to be trees removed, you would just cut them at the stump very carefully and make sure that they're felled away from the area, again, because the weight on this delicate soil that might have graves not 6 or 4 feet down. So, but right now there are no plans to do that, but were they to, that care would be taken to have them go away from the site. Right now, the only plan is to clear out the brush at the roots and then just continue to do that until it dies.
Okay, so, I would open it up to the committee if anyone else has any other business that they would like to discuss. Okay, and then I would open it up to public comment, which really would just be Kathy. Seeing no one from the public, I would await a motion to adjourn. And seconded by Dee. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you in September.